Hello and welcome to this little video about the concept of internal conflict when it comes to writing stories. Now, when it comes to conflict, a common conflict is often man versus man. This is something that we often see. There's man versus nature, man versus destiny, all sorts of different things. Man versus man is one of the most common. You have, let's just say, the protagonist and the antagonist, and they are competing against each other to reach a common goal. Maybe it's to strive for power, maybe it's to strive for the same woman, maybe to strive for the same job, or whatever it is, particular thing, okay? And again, we can excuse completely sexist language here. It could be woman versus woman, whatever. Anyway, person versus person, maybe that's a better way of putting it. However, one of the more effective tools when it comes to writing is man versus himself, or again, woman versus herself. So again, that's just the terminology. That's the old archaic way of doing it, so please forgive the politically incorrect term, but it is what it is. Okay, so this is an extremely effective conflict and often makes stories more interesting and makes the characters more alive. Now, what are the things that we need to consider when it comes to making a conflict? Well, according to the website, thewritingpractice.com, good conflict is about values. It's not necessarily just about events trying to jump over a fence or whatever. It's about values. Now, the website goes on to say how to create conflict. It says, what does your main character value? Do any of his or her values potentially conflict? This is important when it comes to the concept of internal conflict. How can you reveal the conflict in those values? Something to consider when you're writing. Do any of his or her values conflict with themselves? Again, these are two important things to consider when you have the internal conflict. And how do you delve into the complications of that single value? So these are questions that you need to ask yourself when you want to create conflict, but especially internal conflict. Now, to give some example about that, let me give you a real-life example, and excuse the sound like self-promoting, but it's really not. Here is an example of do any values conflict with themselves. So in the book, The Mirror of the Soul, now again, I'm using my own book simply because when they say, what did the author mean? Well, I don't know, I'm not the author. Well, in this particular case, I am the author, so I can tell you what I mean. The main character is named Christophe. This takes place in France, so it is Christophe. And his internal conflict is, well, really the setting is that this diamond falls from the sky. And the priests at the local abbey, or the monks of the local abbey, sees this as a way of gaining power and tricking people into making donations to the church to give them more power, to make their life easier, and such like this. And people believe that this diamond has magical powers to forgive their sins, to grant eternal life, and so forth. Christophe, he is basically a storyteller at heart. He is a musician. He loves to perform at the local pubs and taverns. People love to hear him sing. He's got a marvelous voice. And give that Christophe, huh? Anyway, however, his day-to-day job, he cannot make a living doing the creative things he wants to do. He actually works as a salesman of sorts for a merchant in town, a very wealthy merchant who brings in all sorts of different items, who was profiting quite well during the 100 Years' War, but since the war ended, is having to find new ways to bring in items that people are now just starting to afford, and it's Christophe's job to make sure that he sells it. Well, Christophe does not make enough money to donate to the church to become a member to use the value of the diamond. The problem he's got is his wife tends to get very sick during the wintertime, and he wants to be able to save up to give her a blessing of health. So he basically is doing a job that he hates, he hates being the salesperson. His boss is an absolute nightmare of a boss to have. And he would much rather be creating stories and singing and stuff like this. So his internal conflict is valuing what he needs to do to be the husband, provider, and then really what brings him joy in life. So he's miserable in what he is doing. Okay, so he doesn't like that. That's a conflict. He doesn't like what he does on a daily basis, but he needs to do it to be able to provide for his family, something he values. He also values being able to tell stories, but then he wouldn't be able to provide for his family. A little bit of a commentary on maybe how creative writers have to view things. Something to consider. So this internal conflict about Christophe drives him to make the decisions that he does throughout the story. without this internal conflict, he's not nearly as interesting as a character, and the decisions that he makes may seem random or whatever, but in the end, you can have a more empathetic view of him, or even maybe sympathetic if you can relate to him more about how that works. So that is an example of internal conflict. So remember, this is important when you really want to have strong characters and you're looking at conflict. Really, it's important to have the idea of man versus himself, again, woman versus herself, person versus themselves, as it were. These internal conflicts tend to make the characters more well-rounded, and it can lead to more understanding of the decisions they make overall.